Imagine a tradition where young girls' feet are broken and tightly bound to change shape, creating what is known as lotus feet. This was the practice of foot binding in China, which originated with 10th-century court dancers. It spread to the elite during the Song dynasty and later permeated lower social classes by the Qing dynasty. Despite efforts by the Manchu emperors in the 17th century to ban it, the practice persisted. By the 19th century, 40 to 50% of Chinese women had bound feet, with nearly all upper-class Han Chinese women participating. Christian missionaries and Chinese reformers took a stand against foot binding in the late 19th century, initiating anti-foot binding campaigns that led to its decline in the early 20th century. Urban and upper-class women abandoned the practice sooner than their rural and poorer counterparts. By 2007, only a few elderly women with bound feet remained. The origins of foot binding are shrouded in fascinating stories. One tale speaks of southern Qi Emperor Xiao Baoan's consort, Pan Yuna, whose barefoot dance on a golden lotus design inspired the term lotus feet. Another account credits 10th century Emperor Li Yu of the southern Tang with starting the practice by asking his concubine Yao Nian to bind her feet and dance. Early references to foot binding date back to around 1100, with archaeological evidence from the 13th century revealing bound foot remains. European accounts began with Italian missionary Odoric of Pordenone in the 14th century, marking the beginning of Western awareness. Foot binding became common among the gentry and the general populace by the Ming period, and it was seen as a status symbol. However, the practice restricted women's movement and contributed to the decline of women's dance in China. Opposition to foot binding grew in the 18th century, intensifying in the 19th century with the Taiping Rebellion banning it in their territories. Christian missionaries continued to oppose the practice, forming anti-foot binding societies and educating girls. Reform-minded Chinese intellectuals and early feminists criticized foot binding. In 1912 the Republic of China banned the practice, but enforcement varied. By the mid-20th century, the practice had nearly ended, with the last shoe factory making Lotus shoes closing in 1999. Foot binding was practiced in various forms across different regions. In some areas, less severe forms like cucumber foot existed. Foot binding limited girls' mobility, leading to engagement in handwork. Regional practices and the necessity for female labor influenced the prevalence of foot binding. Non-Han Chinese and some Muslim communities did not practice it. The process of foot binding began before the foot arch fully developed, typically between ages 4 and 9. It involved soaking the feet, cutting toenails, breaking and binding the toes, and regularly rebinding them tighter. This painful practice caused infections, deformities, and lifelong disabilities. Despite its negative impacts, some late 20th century feminists suggested it gave women a sense of mastery over their bodies and pride in their beauty. Bound feet were seen as enhancing women's beauty and status, with the most desirable feet being around 10 centimeters or smaller. Foot binding has been interpreted in many ways as a fashion practice, cultural tradition, or form of oppression. Early Chinese feminists like Zhu Jin criticized it, advocating for women's emancipation through education. Scholars debate the motivations and impacts of foot binding, with some viewing it as a means to keep women engaged in handwork. Mechanized industry reduced the need for handwork, leading to the practice's decline. The 1842 Treaty of Nanjing, which opened cities to foreigners, marked the beginning of the end for foot binding, condemned by missionaries. Despite attempts to ban it during the Qing dynasty, foot binding persisted as an expression of Han identity.